You wake in the middle of the night and something feels wrong. Not frightening, just too familiar. The air is thick, the silence feels rehearsed, and it's as if the room itself has been here before, waiting for you to notice. Then, from somewhere deep inside that stillness, a voice begins to speak. It doesn't sound divine or human. It sounds like truth stripped of mercy. Would you live this life again? Exactly as it is. You don't move. The question isn't hypothetical. It feels like a verdict. You think about the hours you've wasted, the people you've loved half-heartedly, the small betrayals you convinced yourself didn't matter. You think about the mornings you woke promising yourself you'd change, and the nights you fell back into the same patterns. And suddenly you understand. This is the test. Nietzsche called it the eternal recurrence. The idea that every second of your life will return endlessly, that nothing is erased, nothing undone. No next time, no redemption, only the infinite repetition of what already is. The thought is unbearable at first, because it takes away the illusion that tomorrow will save you. It forces you to see what you've been avoiding, that every choice carries the weight of eternity. But somewhere inside that terror, a strange calm begins to rise. If everything repeats, then this moment matters infinitely. Every breath becomes sacred, every silence a declaration. Maybe this isn't a curse at all. Maybe the question isn't meant to punish you, but to awaken you, to see whether you can look at your life exactly as it is and still whisper, yes, I would live it again. Most people live in delay. It doesn't feel like a decision, but it is. We wait for the real beginning, the moment that will justify everything, the version of ourselves that will finally know how to live. We fill the space between now and then with distractions that resemble purpose. We build plans, routines, dreams, small rituals to protect ourselves from the feeling that maybe this is all there is. We promise ourselves that meaning will arrive once the right circumstances line up. Once we've earned it, once the noise quiets down, once we've become worthy of our own attention. But days pass, then years, and the life we imagined never appears. The promise of tomorrow becomes the architecture of our denial. It keeps us safe from the only truth that actually matters, that we're already living the thing we keep waiting for. That's what Nietzsche saw so clearly. Eternal recurrence isn't an abstract idea about time looping. It's a mirror held up to the way we hide from the present. It asks a simple, merciless question. If this life, exactly as it is, repeated endlessly, would you still want it? The thought cuts through you because it removes the illusion of progress. You start to realize how much of what you do is a postponement, a way of surviving without confronting what your days have become. When you really sit with the thought, you begin to see the structure of your own repetition, how the same conflicts reappear, how the same fears find new disguises, how every relationship eventually becomes a reflection of the same unresolved ache. You tell yourself you're learning, evolving, maturing, but the deeper truth is that you're orbiting the same center. The details change, the pattern doesn't. You can leave cities, break habits, fall in and out of love, and still feel the same quiet emptiness humming underneath it all. It's easy to confuse movement for transformation. The world rewards you for that confusion. As long as you stay busy, no one will ask whether you're awake. You can achieve, succeed, impress, but the cycle keeps turning, and you remain in the same place internally. Eternal recurrence isn't meant to punish you for that. It's meant to expose it. It strips away the illusion that the next moment will be different simply because it's next. It forces you to see that what you call time is just the accumulation of choices you refuse to confront. When that realization lands, it doesn't feel philosophical. It feels personal. You start replaying the moments you treated as disposable, the arguments you could have ended with kindness, the nights you numbed yourself instead of listening to the silence, the mornings you woke up and promised you'd change, only to repeat the same motions again. You see how every small surrender becomes part of a pattern that defines who you are. You see that your life has never been waiting to begin. It's been asking you to participate. That recognition breaks something in you. For a while, it feels like despair. You see how much time you've traded for safety, how often you've betrayed yourself to avoid uncertainty. You realize that the future you've been chasing doesn't exist anywhere except in your imagination. But underneath the grief, there's clarity, a clean, brutal kind. Without the fantasy of tomorrow, you're left with nothing to hide behind. There's no next version of you coming to make sense of this. There's only this version, here, breathing, aware, with no exit except awareness itself. And awareness changes everything. Once you see that every moment could be eternal, you start to feel the weight of even the smallest choices. The tone in your voice when you speak to someone you love, the way you look at a stranger, the thoughts you let shape your mind when no one is watching. Every one of them feels heavier, because you understand that they're not passing through time. They're defining it. Eternity isn't somewhere out there. It's the echo of what you do now, repeating in the only universe that matters, your own becoming. At first, that pressure feels unbearable. It makes the ordinary almost too intense to stand. But then, something quiet begins to shift. The weight of eternity stops feeling like punishment and starts to feel like proof that your life isn't meaningless, that even the smallest gesture carries the full gravity of existence. You begin to act differently, not out of fear, but out of respect for the reality that there's no rehearsal, no draft, no do-over. This is the whole thing. The prison of tomorrow dissolves the moment you see it for what it is, a way of staying unconscious. The walls were never built by time. They were built by postponement. When you stop waiting for a life you already have, you begin to inhabit it. The same world remains around you, but it starts to look different. The air feels sharper. Colors have weight. Even silence seems alive. This is what Nietzsche's thought demands. Not that you believe in the literal recurrence of time, but that you learn to live as if every moment is final. It's a ruthless kind of freedom, one that strips away fantasy and leaves you with only what's true. And maybe that's the beginning of wisdom. Not escape, not enlightenment, just the raw recognition that eternity is already here, and you're inside it. When you stop running toward the future, you're left standing in the wreckage of everything you've been avoiding. The silence that follows is almost unbearable. It's the kind of silence that doesn't simply surround you. It shows you to yourself. You begin to see how much of your identity was built on escape, how much of what you call ambition was really a form of denial. It's disorienting to wake up inside your own life and realize how unfamiliar it feels. Without the fantasy of what comes next, there's only what has already happened. The words you said and can't unsay, the choices you made out of fear, the faces that have faded from your reach. It's all here, waiting to be acknowledged. Nietzsche called this confrontation amor fati, the love of one's fate. Not as an idea, but as a discipline. The act of meeting reality on its own terms. You learn very quickly that acceptance isn't peace. It's a kind of nakedness. You start to see the ways you've fractured yourself. The person you pretend to be, the one you hide, and the one who lives quietly between them. The mirror doesn't separate them anymore. It merges them. And the sight of that unity is painful. You realize that the things you thought you had outgrown still live inside you, still shape the way you move through the world. At first, you hate what you see. You judge yourself for the weakness, for the inconsistency, for every cowardly compromise that let you drift further from the person you wanted to be. But then something shifts. The longer you hold your gaze, the less dramatic the reflection becomes. You stop seeing a monster or a victim and begin to see something simpler, a human being caught in the act of becoming, someone who has suffered and caused suffering, who has failed and kept going, someone who never stopped trying to make sense of what it means to exist. That's the beginning of affirmation. It isn't joy, it isn't self-love in the sentimental sense. It's the moment you stop fighting the truth of your own existence. You stop demanding that life be fair or symmetrical or beautiful. You accept that it's uneven, strange, full of mistakes that can't be undone. And somehow, you stop wanting to undo them. The very things you once wanted to erase start to feel essential, like the rough edges of a stone that make it real. You begin to understand what Nietzsche meant by loving your fate. It isn't a philosophy of comfort. It's a rebellion against despair. To love your fate is to look at everything that has happened, the losses, the betrayals, the emptiness, and say, this too belongs. This too is part of what makes me. It's an act of defiance against resentment, against the impulse to rewrite your past or demand a softer world. When you start to live that way, even pain changes its shape. It stops feeling like punishment and starts to feel like participation. The weight of your memories becomes something you can carry without shame. The old regrets lose their poison. You begin to feel a strange tenderness toward the version of yourself who didn't know better. Not pity, but understanding. You see how every wrong turn, every broken thing, was still movement, still motion toward awareness. The mirror never stops reflecting, but it becomes less hostile. You catch glimpses of something almost holy in the ordinary. A flash of sunlight through a cracked window, the sound of your own breath when the world goes quiet. You realize that life was never asking to be perfect. It was asking to be seen. To affirm your life is to stop treating it like a problem to be solved. It's to hold it, trembling, incomplete, and still call it yours. Every failure becomes part of the architecture. Every loss becomes proof that you've lived deeply enough to risk love. You begin to forgive the past for being exactly what it was. And in that forgiveness, you feel a pulse of freedom. Not the kind that comes from escape, but the kind that comes from finally arriving. You don't transcend the mirror. You don't smash it. You learn to live inside it. You understand that affirmation isn't about rewriting the story. It's about reading it honestly, with your eyes open, without flinching. And maybe that's what it means to love your fate. To stay, even when it hurts, because leaving would mean abandoning the only truth you'll ever have. At some point, the fight with life runs out of energy. You reach a silence that isn't resignation, but recognition. You realize that every time you try to force meaning into existence, you are really trying to avoid its uncertainty. Every attempt to control the story came from fear. Fear that without a reason, the pain wouldn't count. But once you've faced yourself fully, that fear loses its hold. You stop needing explanations. You stop trying to make everything add up. Nietzsche's eternal yes begins there, in the absence of justification. It's not a theory. It's a shift in the way you inhabit the world. It happens quietly, the way dawn arrives, not as light at first, but as the end of darkness. You begin to sense a different kind of strength in yourself. Not the power to change life, but the power to let it unfold. You no longer divide your experiences into good or bad. You stop waiting for redemption. The same events that once felt tragic start to feel inevitable. Every pain, every failure, every betrayal, they all reveal their strange necessity. They were never obstacles to meaning. They were the conditions of it. You start to see how each one shaped the texture of who you are. Without them, the story wouldn't even exist. The yes isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with joy or certainty. It arrives in small gestures. The way you breathe through discomfort instead of retreating. The way you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it. The way you keep walking, even when you don't know where the path leads. The yes lives in motion. It's the willingness to return, to continue. to live this same life again without complaint. You begin to sense that eternity isn't somewhere in the distance. It's not an infinite stretch of time, but the depth of a single moment when you stop resisting. The yes is what happens when you give yourself completely to that moment, when you let it hurt and still call it yours, when you stop asking what life owes you and start asking what it would mean to love it exactly as it is. There's a strange kind of peace in that surrender. It doesn't remove the pain, but it gives it shape. It makes the suffering bearable because it becomes part of a larger rhythm. You start to see that meaning was never something you were supposed to find. It's something you create in the act of saying yes to what already is. You become the source of affirmation itself. To live this way doesn't make you invincible. You still bleed, still break, still feel lost. But the despair no longer defines you. You move through it differently, without the desperation to escape. You begin to live as if every choice is eternal, not because you fear the consequence, but because you understand the weight of being alive. The yes turns ordinary life into something vast. You start to notice details that were invisible before. The way light moves across a wall, the sound of a stranger's laughter, the quiet persistence of your own breathing. Nothing has changed, but everything feels new. When Nietzsche imagined the demon whispering his question, "Would you live this life again, exactly as it is, forever?" He wasn't testing your optimism. He was testing your capacity for truth. To answer yes is to stop seeking a different world and start belonging to this one completely. It's to understand that even the unbearable has its place, that even sorrow is a form of connection. It's to become someone who doesn't wait for eternity, but lives as if it's already here. The yes doesn't erase the past. It doesn't promise happiness. It's an act of courage, the choice to keep living without conditions, to let the cycle repeat and still participate with open eyes. You don't become something supernatural. You become real, fully, painfully, beautifully real. And one day, when that voice returns, when the question rises again from the dark, asking whether you would live this same life twice, you won't flinch. You'll feel the quiet pulse of your own existence, and you'll whisper the only word that ever mattered: yes. There's a moment after everything has been seen when the noise finally stops. You realize that life doesn't wait for your understanding. It moves, with or without you. Nietzsche's question was never for philosophers and libraries. It was for anyone awake enough to feel the weight of their own existence. Would you live this life again? It doesn't ask for an answer, only your attention. Every act, every silence, every kindness or betrayal shapes the world you might return to. There's no later, no audience waiting to applaud your becoming. Only this moment, and what you do inside it. If you've made it this far, you already feel it. Something in you wants to stop drifting. So take it seriously, not someday, now. Live like this moment matters. Speak honestly. Create something real. Love someone without waiting for it to be safe. That's the real test. Not to understand the eternal recurrence, but to live as if it's true. And if the question ever returns in the dark, if the voice asks whether you'd live this same life twice, I hope you can look at everything you've made and whisper, without fear, yes. If this reached that quiet part of you that's tired of sleepwalking, stay, subscribe. The loop doesn't end here. It begins again every time you hit play.